If you were to count every single one of their little faces, what would you come up with? 500, maybe? Maybe 1,000? So now let's have 1,000 of these pictures. A couple thousand of these pictures. The magnitude is staggering. We spent 8 weeks in Leviticus, and over that time we discussed some of the objections to studying the book of Leviticus. There actually are some theological reasons, some deep-held beliefs why Leviticus is not for the Western Christian church. That's what people believe. Now we're in Numbers. There's a whole new set of issues with Numbers. Raise your hand if you really like long names and long numbers. Raise your hand if you really like math. And so the objection to the book of Numbers is not theological. It's just more, it's boring. You get into a long list of names and your brain checks out. Kind of feels like you're getting lectured. So we have some similarities of tools in the book of Numbers, how to keep engaged and how important it is. And probably the first one is God cares about the details. God cares about every single one. Later we hear about the despised, I think the Amalekites, who attacked them. And it says they attacked them out at their outskirts, which means the armies attacked the poor, not the poor, the weak and the old that were falling behind. Imagine a herd. It's always the wildebeest at the end who can't run as fast, who gets attacked. God is keeping track. And so as we see the development of how they're supposed to camp and how they're supposed to march, it is protecting, keeping them all safe. Okay. The Hebrew name for the fourth book of the Torah and the name of its first reading is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. It comes from the first words of the first verse, which say, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai." The English title of the book is Numbers, which is derived from the Greek Septuagint version of the Torah. The book of Numbers tells the story of Israel's trek through the wilderness on their way to the promised land, their failure at the edge of the land, and the subsequent 40 years of wandering, or the subsequent 39, however many years are left. It concludes with the story of the second generation's triumph over the first Canaanite resistance. The book ends with the Israelites poised on the edge of Canaan, ready to take their inheritance. Woven in the midst of these narratives is a significant amount of legal material, aka boring. Detail, detail, detail. And that's why people check out. But there is a lot of exciting things that happen in this book too. There are a lot of stories in the book of Numbers that keep people engaged and interested, like the 12 spies. We've all heard that story. There actually aren't any stories in the book of Leviticus that stand out like that. The first reading from Bamidbar and the 34th reading from the Torah begin with a census of the tribes of Israel and the Levitical families just prior to the departure from Sinai. Today we're start Numbers 1:1 through 4, chapters 1 through 4, and I'll be reading most of chapter 1. The first census of Israel. If this is the first census of Israel, how do they know how many people left Egypt? Chapter 2, the order and encampment and marching, the sons of Aaron, the duties of the Levites, a census of the Levites, the redemption of the firstborn, and the Kohathites. And probably here, because we're not going to get into it, there are 3 clans in Levi. Kohathites include Moses and Aaron. It's part of their family. So they're the Levites that are most closely related to Moses and Aaron. They're the Levites that are closest to the priests, but not. I ask a question, and we see in the book of Numbers this growing frustration. The question is, did people like their job assignments? Did people like where they were assigned to camp? We'll see in the book of Numbers with the rebellions. And then in the Haftarah, we have 1 Samuel, this story about Jonathan and David. and the realization that, yes, Saul doesn't like David enough that he would try to kill his own son. That's pretty deep. And then in Matthew 24. Matthew 24 is the most vivid of the Gospels describing what we would call apocalyptic literature. And if you're not familiar with the parts of the Bible that come before Matthew, you might think that Jesus just made this stuff up. That kind of is the perspective, that Jesus was a prophet and he was saying this is going to happen and this is going to happen because we're ignorant of all of the books that he's quoting. He wasn't making things up. It wasn't new information. He was saying, remember that book you read? Let me tell you this. Remember that verse you read? Let me tell you this. He was explaining the Bible to the disciples. So that's in Matthew 24, the coming of the Son of Man. This is the timeline I have been working on. It's getting a little bit more complete. And to review, Genesis starts way over there and ends here. Many years in the book of Genesis. Genesis ends with Joseph dying, and then there probably is a little gap. And then at the beginning of Exodus, we hear about this new king. This bottom line is the life of Moses. We hear about his birth. We hear about something that happens at 40. We hear about a whole bunch of stuff that happens around 80. 80 is when he comes back and the whole Exodus process begins. And it's all crowded right up here. And so in the book of Exodus, I made it white. I don't know if it makes sense. There's a huge gap. We don't know what happened in here. There's nothing in our story. But it's all crammed right in here. The first day of the first month of the first year was before the first Passover. That's 2 weeks before Passover. And that's when they started to get the instructions about how to gather the lamb, because God is going to get you out of Egypt. So the plagues start a little bit before this day. Today in the book of Numbers, we're exactly 1 year and 1 month out of Egypt. Closely, give or take. The book of Leviticus was sandwiched in here. They get to Mount Sinai in the 3rd month. The tabernacle is constructed and God's presence falls exactly 1 year out of Egypt. And then on the 8th day, this is the only date, the only calendar date that I found in the book of Leviticus, and that is God's presence fell in the tabernacle. Then they took 7 days to consecrate the priests. And then the next story is Nadab and Abihu. That tragedy. So that was our date. And in the book of Numbers, we have the same kind of thing. We have all this white space in the middle. Now, we'll see there are a couple of stories that happen somewhere in the middle, but most of Numbers is the very beginning, before they leave Sinai, and the very end, as they're camped in the plains of Moab and they're looking across the Jordan. Exodus covers many, many, many years. Leviticus is short. Numbers covers about 39 years, and then Deuteronomy is going to be short again. And we'll get to this in a minute, meaning a couple of days. Leviticus starts the 2nd month, 1st day. Chapter 9 is the 2nd month. No. Chapter 9 is the 1st month and the 14th day. Chapter 9 is Passover, which comes before chapter 1. So Numbers, we're going to get to chapter 9 and then jump back, and then we're going to get to chapter 10 and jump forward again, and then around chapter 13 is when they enter the land with the 12 spies. So we'll keep developing this. It helps me make sense of it, and hopefully it's clarifying. All right, let us pray. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for these people. And I thank you for your word. I thank you for the diligent and obedient hands that gave it to us. Your word has been preserved through countless generations of faithful Christians and Jews. Thank you for that tradition. And I pray that we would guard it as well. We ask that in your Son's holy name. Amen. Chapter 1 of Numbers. Yehovah spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year. So I'm just saying 2:1:2. Wilderness is the title of this. It's on the word study. We can talk about that later. Tent of meeting, and this is Moedim. You wouldn't be there unless something was happening. Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel by clans, by father's house, according to the number of names, every male, head by head. Number is on the word study, and that is the English title of this book. And we'll find that this word number shows up actually many, many times in chapter 1. I like this head by head. That actually is count the skulls, count the part of the head that sticks up, which is different than this head, which is more of a title of authority. From 20 years old and upward, all in Israel who are able to go to war, you and Aharon shall list them, company by company, and there shall be with you a man from each tribe, each man being the head of the house of his fathers. And these are the names of the men who shall assist you. So this is more of a grassroots election. So each one of the tribes has pushed up someone, a delegate, a representative, if you will, and they will meet, all 12 of them. This counting of them, the total number, I asked before, how did they know how many came out of Egypt? I'll read that verse as kind of a prelude. This is Exodus 12:37. And the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. About 600,000 men on foot. Did they know how many, or was it an estimate, or did they count them? How long ago was this? A year ago. So maybe the number has come from the census, present day, and it's been put back in the story because it's about the same number of people. But also in that connection is they left about 600,000 men plus the mixed multitude. In the census that happens in this portion, is the mixed multitude counted? From Reuben, Eliezer the son of Shedur. Now, when we get to a list like this, we all think, I should have practiced more. So instead of reading it in this form, I'm going to read it in this form so that we actually see the square of the camp. Let's look at this for a little bit. So there are 12 tribes minus Levi, and we get to 12 because Joseph is split into two. Joseph is split into Ephraim and Manasseh, and then Levi camps around here. So there's a total of 13 total tribes. They're broken up into these 4 groups. Camping, this would be east, to the east, west, north, south. We also see the relative numbers from each group, the total number. So over here it says Camp of Judah. And when you have 3 tribes like this, you have to call them something. So it makes sense to call them Judah. Now, in this case, Judah is actually the biggest. So this is the camp of Judah, camp of Reuben, camp of Ephraim, camp of Dan. And then the Levites camp around here with Moses and the priests being at the entrance. So the entrance of the tabernacle would be here. And while we're looking at this picture, it says that a stranger is not allowed to come in. Basically, it's a capital crime for a stranger to get in. How would a stranger get in? Let's say the stranger is not part of Israel at all. They would have to fight through, they would have to walk through 186,000 men. So let's add women and children, let's triple that. 500,000. Then they would have to walk through Moses and the priests. This doesn't happen on accident. You would have to be quite rebellious in order to violate this structure of the camp. And I don't think we get into it in this portion, but they peel off in this order to march. Camp of Judah in front, that's this number, followed by the camp of Reuben, followed by everything here. All the Levites and the tabernacle are in the middle, followed by camp of Ephraim, followed by camp of Dan. So both in the camp structure and the marching, The tabernacle is in the midst of the camp. Tabernacle is in the middle. All right. From Simeon, Shelumiel, the son of Zurishaddai. From Judah, Nashon, the son of Aminadab. As I read these, whether or not I pronounce them correctly, are there any names that sound familiar? Does anything stand out to you? We've heard this before. Shaddai. Have you heard this before? Serpent. From Issachar, Nethanel, the son of Zuar. From Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helon. From the sons of Joseph, from Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Aminahud. And from Manasseh, Gamaliel, the son of Pedazur. From Benjamin, Abidan, the son of Gideoni. From Dan, Ahiezer, the son of Ammishaddai. From Asher, Pagiel, the son of Ochran. From Gad, Eliasaph, the son of Duel. From Naphtali, Ahira, the son of Anan. These were the ones chosen from the congregation, the chiefs of their ancestral tribes, the heads of the clans of Israel. Moshe and Aharon took these men who had been named. Designated by name is how many of the versions say. And this phrase, had been named, is the identical phrase we looked at before about being cursed. It's being cursed is being named for something negative. This is being named, designated, like I'm going to point, you for that role. A curse would be you for a bad thing. This designation is you for a function, a role. And on the first day of the second month, they assembled the whole congregation together, who registered themselves by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names from 20 years old and upward, head by head, as Jehovah had commanded Moshe. So he listed them in the wilderness of Sinai. This listed is the numbered on the word study. Listed, numbered, I like to think of it as accounted for. In accounting, every dollar, every penny has an assignment. This listed means every person, even to the smallest person, has a job to do, a job title. So 20 years old and upward. We've heard this before. We heard this back 6 months ago. Exodus 30:11. The Lord said to Moses, "When you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there should be no plague among them when you number them. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not give more, the poor shall not give less than half a shekel. When you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives, you shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord, so as to make atonement for your lives." This is Exodus 30. That's more than a whole book ago. So it's one of the times again when God says, when you take a census, but it's 6 months later that it actually happens. So they knew they were going to count the men from 20 years old and up. And sometimes this back in Exodus is called the poll tax. The people of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, their generations by their clans, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, head by head, every male from 20 years old and upward, all who were able to go to war. Those listed of the tribe of Reuben were 46,500. Now this, everything between Reuben and the number is basically repeated in each one of these. And I'll just jump ahead to this. Let's look at the numbers. Who's biggest? Toward the end of Numbers, we have another census, and you see there's some change. Some of the tribes were more successful during the wilderness than others. Reuben, 46,500. Simeon, 59,300. Gad, 45,650. Judah, 74,600. Issachar, 54,400. Zebulun, 57,400. Of the people of Joseph, namely the people of Ephraim, 40,500. Manasseh, 32,200. Benjamin, 35,400. Dan, 62,700. Asher, 41,500. Naphtali, 43,400. And I apologize to those who think that doing math is work and shouldn't be done on Shabbat. So it's not listed in this picture. Oh, it is here. If you add up all of these, you get to about 22,000. So the Levites are smaller than any of these tribes. These are those who are listed, whom Moshe and Aharon listed, that's that numbered, with the help of the chiefs of Israel, 12 men, each representing his father's house. So the census was assisted by the regional leaders. And I promise that, let's see which one of these looks biggest. Judah, 74,000. If there's 74,000 and there's one head, there's going to be other regional leaders even smaller, down to, we talked before about leaders over tens and hundreds and so on. And so this verse says, with the help of. Moses and Aaron didn't do the census. It was each tribe's job to count themselves. So all those listed of the people of Israel by their fathers' houses from 20 years old and upward, every man able to go to war in Israel, all those listed were 603,550. But the Levites were not listed. So this is the assigned. We're not listed along with them by their ancestral tribe. For Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not list. You shall not take a census of them among the people of Israel. Levi is set apart. So there's one list with everybody's name and assignment on it. There's another list with the Levites counted and assigned. They're both counted, but they're not on the same list. But appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, over all that belongs to it. They are able to carry the tabernacle and its furnishings, and they shall take care of it and shall camp around the tabernacle. When the tabernacle is to set out, the Levites will take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And if any outsider comes near, he shall be put to death. Remember, that's what I described before. That's not an accident. It's saying if anyone who doesn't belong, this is the word stranger, but it means anyone other than. If someone wanted to violate all that structure, if someone wanted to just barge right in, that's a serious offense. This is not a child. This is not an accident. The people of Israel shall pitch their tents by their companies, each man in his own camp, and each man by his own standard. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, so that there may be no wrath on the congregation of the people of Israel. And the Levites shall keep guard over the tabernacle of the testimony. Thus did the people of Israel. They did according to all that Yehovah had commanded Moshe. And this according to all that God had commanded is on the word study. This guard is the one we talk about a lot. Keep the commandments. Guard the commandments. It was the Levites, in a very literal sense, it was their guard to keep the commandments. Because the commandments are written on those tablets, and they're stored in the tabernacle, and it was their job to guard it. And here it says to guard, where's that word wrath? It's in here somewhere. To protect the people. There it is. So that there may be no wrath on the congregation. Why would there be wrath on the congregation? Not because God's a wrathful God, but the Levites were between the people and God because he's holy and they're often unclean. That unclean thing, I want to talk about it in the 1 Samuel passage. We get into a condition by being human that we need to clean ourselves up before we come that close to God. And the Levites were there to assist the people with it. We spent a lot of time in the book of Leviticus asking, who are you in the story? You're not the doctor. You're not the priest. Other people do that job for you, and it's their job to protect the people. We're back at the beginning. We have a microphone here. Questions, comments? Up here in the front, Richard, correct? Good morning, sir.
Good morning. So I was just wondering, I heard a while back that the tribe of Dan had turned to idolatry and was compromised. What tribe replaced Dan, if that's true?
So I believe that comes out of trying to figure out why Dan is not listed in the book of Revelation. When it talks about the 144,000, there's a tribe missing. And I think that's people trying to figure out why that might be. I don't think Dan is completely erased. In fact, let's go back here. This list includes, everybody say that? I think it's pronounced God, but regardless, all of them are on this list. This list is in a slightly different order. And so a lot of that mentality is looking through the times the 12 tribes are listed. They're in different orders sometimes, or there is somebody inexplicably missing. And in Revelation is where that comes from. Yes.
When
Kevin.
you look at in Ezekiel and his prophecy regarding the temple, the millennial temple, for lack of a better term, Dan is listed, and that's speaking of when Messiah returns.
Yeah. And so some people explain it kind of like this, that it was kind of a nugget for you to find that they weren't listed. Like you figure out why they weren't listed. It doesn't mean they're excluded. It means the author was trying to put an Easter egg, if you will, a hidden little trick. Good one, yeah. Who else? Gita over here, good morning.
So I had something I wanted to mention, but you brought up about, again, like, who are we in the story? And when we look at the Levites, I like that you said that it wasn't to keep them away from God, but to guide them into how to come into Him and come close to Him. And that, yes, when we look at that story, maybe we're not the Levites, we're not the doctors, but I think when we look at the world, that all of us are, because it's our work to guide people into being able to come near to God.
Certainly, yeah. I am somebody's parent, and I am somebody's child. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Yeah.
Did you have more?
And then the other thing I wanted to just say is something that I listened to this week, and it just connected to me because of what we're reading, Bamidbar, that, we're talking about this time now. We're going to focus on their time in the wilderness. And that, so in Psalm 23, it starts out with saying, He is my shepherd, He leads me besides, He gives me this. And then you come to, I walk through the valley of shadow of death. And after that, it's, I fear no evil because you are with me. You prepare a table for me. You anoint my head. So it seems like that wilderness experience, or that valley of shadow of death experience, is one given in order to help us have a more closer, intimate relationship. So instead of a third person, God is up there, then He's someone close to me. And that we think about the children of Israel having to roam around in the wilderness for 40 years as a punishment. And I know this was in my brain as it was a punishment because they didn't want to go in when the spies came back and gave their reports. But what was pointed out, and I think affected me, was that it was more that Yahweh just wanted to offered them the opportunity and the time to get to know him better and trust him more, and so be able to be nearer and closer to him and know him better before they go into the land and establish themselves there.
Yeah, the concept of the wilderness and what is the wilderness is huge. You started with who are you in the story. We're going to get to some rebellions coming up. Are you a rebel? Are you one of the faithful that didn't rebel? Are you one of the leadership who had to watch it? Are you God? Like, who are you in the story? Yeah, good. The wilderness. The solution in Psalm 23 is not that we wouldn't be in the dark place. The solution is that he's there with us. And you talked about the Levites being, helping the people, facilitating the people, cleaning up the people. That's the son's job. Did anyone ever have your child out playing on a playground or out playing in the neighborhood and they would bring home another child to you, introduce you? Oh, this is my friend. That's what the son does. As he engages with us, he befriends us, and then he takes us back to meet his dad. Yeah, very good. All right. I saw this posted on Facebook this week. Anyone else see it? Temple Institute. And it's the camping around. It's just an artist description. But again, when I see this, here's a person, that little dot. If that's a person and that's a tent, that's about a 3-man tent. There's like 300 people on this picture. Not a couple million. And also, I don't see any camping for the Levites. Like they all camped around here. And I also don't see any livestock. And so the magnitude of this is staggering. All right, let's talk about the firstborns here a minute. Some people actually take this word instead, when it's talking about the Levites being chosen instead of the firstborn, they take it as God's original intent was to be the priests in Israel would be all of the firstborns. That didn't work out because of the golden calf. Plan B, the Levites. And if there's a plan B with that mentality, they tend to also say, this is kind of a replacement theology perspective, if God replaced the priest once, he can do it again. And that's kind of the logic of saying, now the church has replaced the Levites, who replaced the firstborn. I don't think the Levites are a plan B in that sense. God chose Moses before he chose the Levites. Moses is a Levite. He chose Aaron before he chose the Levites at the golden calf. So sometimes as the story looks to us, because we go from a place in our mind where I didn't have the information, and then all of a sudden I do have the information. I don't know that God has that same mentality. He knew about the golden calf before the golden calf. Israel didn't. They didn't know what was going to happen. And so our wee little brains don't quite make sense of it. While we're on the topic of firstborns, apologies to the people who don't like math, but I did a little bit. How many firstborns are there total? 22,000-ish. How many men are there 20 years old and up? 600 and some thousand-ish. Raise your hand if you're a firstborn. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, male or female. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's about 40 people in here. 11 over 40 is about 1/4, which means the average family size represented in this room is about 4. Because if you have a family of size 4, how many of them are firstborns? Well, the one of them. So 1 out of 4. You get that ratio. So you can figure out how large families are. If you divide the total number of firstborns by the total number of people, now this can get complicated. Are any of the firstborns in here? There might be. But that's 1 out of 27 or 1 out of 26. So just looking at these numbers, is that saying that the average family size was 26 or 27? I don't think so. And I call this reasoning from Scripture. We asked before, or I asked, when the firstborns were killed in Egypt, Pharaoh survived. Does that mean he was not a firstborn? Firstborns, raise your hand again. Put your hand down if you've had kids. So now we just went from 1 out of 4 to 1 out of 40. I think this number makes sense because the firstborns who had become fathers of their own were not counted in this number of firstborns. That's why this number is disproportionately 1 out of 27. And so when I see that reflected here in the numbers, then I go back into Egypt and I think, well, maybe Pharaoh was a firstborn, but he had had a child, and so he wasn't killed. When it says that there was a death in every Egyptian home, that means everyone who has kids. So regardless of their family size, one of the kids died. Not necessarily that every firstborn, whether they're a child, a parent, or a grandparent. So I call that reasoning from Scripture. Find something else that makes sense, that's justified somewhere, and then say, oh, that must make some sense. Why do they start counting at a month old? We don't, some people have struggled with losing babies. Infant mortality throughout history has been very high. There are many cultures who do not name, and maybe the Jewish culture is one of them. They don't name until the 8th day because so many babies die before that. So many babies die soon after that also. If you make it to the first month, odds are pretty good you'll make it to childhood. And so it's reflecting infant mortality that we don't quite understand. This next one, we don't have an answer for it yet. Well, actually, we do have an answer. No, they did not like their jobs. In the next 39 years, they find lots of stuff to complain about. One of them is their job assignments. We see the rebellions are driven by that. Did anyone look up Amos 3:7? I'll just leave that for you if no one wants to talk about it. I like this third one here. David was supposed to be somewhere. We just spent 8 weeks in Leviticus. David was supposed to be at a certain meeting, Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, the beginning of the month. He was supposed to be at a meeting with Saul and his family, and he wasn't there. And what is the first thing that Saul thinks of? He must be unclean. We just spent 8 weeks of all the different things that could happen to you which would make you ritually unclean until evening, which means it's perfectly okay for you to miss the first meeting. We know that they had some kind of a feast, some kind of a gathering for 2 nights, maybe more. The first night, Saul says, oh, he must be unclean. If you didn't make it to a gathering, you didn't make it to church, is that what we would assume? If you live in certain places where there's like unpredictable traffic and someone doesn't show up, what do we all assume? Oh, it must be traffic. What did they assume? He must be unclean until evening. Something happened, right? There's nothing wrong with missing the first meeting. But if he missed the second meeting, that means he chose to endanger himself. He chose to go by a dead person. He chose to do all those things. The first one, you get a pass because it was an accident. You couldn't predict it. The second one, and so Saul is like, well, where is he the second night? Because unclean until evening only gets you out of the first. I think that's an interesting connection. Let's look at this. Wilderness. So which is a better title, Wilderness or Numbers? Numbers makes a lot of sense, but so does Wilderness. It's the book of Numbers starts a year out of Egypt, and it ends a month out of Canaan. It is the bulk of the chronology of the 40 years in the wilderness. The bulk of that is in the book of Numbers. So wilderness. The Lord spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai. That is Numbers 1:1. We've seen wilderness quite a few times before. Genesis 14:6, and the Horites in their Mount Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. This is the table of nations back in Genesis. Genesis 21:20, God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. Who's that? Ishmael. He lived in the wilderness. Most people don't live in the wilderness. Most people are just passing through. Like they're going from Egypt to Canaan. The wilderness is the transition in the middle. Most of the time, for most people, wilderness is the difficult transition between two things. Yeshua got baptized. He spent how long in the wilderness? They spent how long in the wilderness? Yeah, 40 and 40. 40 years and 40 days. And they both were led by God into the wilderness. So he gets baptized. He spends 40 days in the wilderness, and then he starts his ministry. Same thing, a transition between the two, except this character, Ishmael, lives in the wilderness. Exodus 3:1. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Same wilderness. Moshe spent 40 years walking around this place. He knew the nooks and crannies. Numbered, I put this one on the list also, but basically the other title of the book. This word numbered is 21 times in Numbers chapter 1. And it keeps showing up in chapter 2, 3, and 4. So the fact that they thought the book should be called Numbers makes perfect sense. In ESV, it's list, which again is that accounting. It's taking this person, one, assigning them to this role. First time we see this numbered, Genesis 21:1. Then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Took note is this same word, which means he didn't forget. An accountant never forgets. Every penny is accounted for. Genesis 39:4. So Joseph found favor in the sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house and all that he owned and put in his charge. It's the same numbered. Overseer. Joseph became the accountant. I think this is over Pharaoh. Yeah, not Pharaoh, Potiphar. Joseph became his accountant. And again, that's Potiphar didn't have to care about his nickels and pennies because Joseph cared about his nickels and pennies. Genesis 50:25. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. God will surely keep track of you, every single one of you. And then, of course, this reminds us of, it's not exactly the same word, in Luke, in that discussion of God cares about birds, God cares about your hair. In fact, has them numbered. And of course, every single one of you is more important than a bird. Every single one of you is more important than someone's hair. But each and every one is accounted for. This according to all. And when I put it in quotes like that, what I'm saying is type it in English with quotes. And I didn't include the entire phrase because if I said according to all that the Lord, if that was all in quotes, it would disclude the ones that say according to all that God commanded. So I shortened it up to get them all. In New American Standard, it shows up 98 times. What have you done that someone else will write about and they will say, you did it according to all that God told you? First time, Genesis 6:22. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. That's the first person we see with this. That's a great honor. Noah did it. He did all that God told him to do. Exodus 39:42. So the sons of Israel did all the work according according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses. This is about the construction of the tabernacle. Ruth. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. I like that connection. Banner. So in English, there's two words, standard and banner, and I thought I had put this one on the word study, and I put this one because other English versions call this banner. So the one I put on there is the word for sign that we've seen quite a bit before. In fact, Genesis 1:14, we read this maybe even last week. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of heavens to separate the day from the night, and let there be signs and for seasons and for days and years. This signs in the sky is this banners. So basically this one, the one that's red standard, is the flag. It's the banner showing the picture of the tribe, and this is the sign. 4:15, Genesis 4:15. So the Lord God said to him, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain so that no one would find him and slay him. And then Song of Songs is this red one, which I thought I was putting on the list. What's that Song of Songs one? He has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love. That's the flag, not sign word. So sorry about that. And then watch. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day the Lord is coming. Stay awake. This watch. Matthew 24:43 is the next verse. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. Sometimes it's watch, sometimes it's stay awake, sometimes it's be alert. And the word watch, it doesn't just mean look. It means an assignment to stay up all night looking. Like there's a lot included there. This word watch is a lot like a security guard. It's someone who is employed with a task and is asked, because it's nighttime and most of us sleep at nighttime, it's an extra bit of work to not fall asleep. And fall asleep can be literal. It also can be figurative. Falling asleep figuratively would be like, often it's described as being drunk, which usually you're not paying attention, or you're caught up in the world. That would be like on your phone. You ever seen someone walking down the street and they're not watching? So let's, Matthew 25:13. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day or the hour. Matthew 26 really gives the context, and we talked about this. This is in the garden. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. Remain here and stay alert. And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. So they had succumbed to what was perfectly natural. And he said to Peter, so you could not watch with me 1 hour? And he figures it's a teachable moment. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So this watch. Revelation 16:15. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk away naked, and the men will not see his shame. Laura.
So thinking back to what Gita said in all this part about the wilderness, it makes me think about, sometimes I hear people referencing the verse in Ephesians about putting off the old man and putting on the new. And it makes me think, so when they were delivered from Egypt, I imagine, if we look at that as our initial salvation, which I realize that's not what that was, but I imagine there is sort of a, celebration of being delivered out of Egypt, just as we celebrate when we are first saved. But oftentimes people indicate that once you become saved, the old man is immediately put away and the new man is immediately put on, and you are perfect and not a sinner, or you should be perfect. And I think about how it took them 40 years in the wilderness that the Lord drew them around to teach them how to live out of Egypt, because outside of Egypt, outside of the what they were used to. So when you think of us being saved and whatever made up who we were before salvation, whatever sin we were used to, whatever childhood we came out of, whatever was normal for us that isn't God's way, it's a beautiful picture of how the Lord brings us through the wilderness, teaching us how to put on the new man after salvation. I never really connected the wilderness story that way in my head, and also to this verse. And so I think that if people are feeling like this verse is indicating that from the moment of salvation, all of what made you who you are up to that point is just gone, and you are immediately perfect. That's a yoke that we're putting on ourselves that God isn't putting on us. He is carrying us or walking us through the wilderness, or the learning who he is and learning the relationship with him in order to be drawn into him, which slowly changes us out of the old man.
Yeah. And if you want to have some debates over church history, we could spend some time there, because each denomination has their own argument and their own words, words like sanctification and redemption, and whether it's a twofold process or a single-fold process. When I work with kids and they get saved and we tell them you're a new person, and they go home and look in the mirror and they still see pimples, we have to teach them through that process. Part of you is new and part of you is the same. And we need to teach people about that. And yeah, it takes a process. How long was the disciples' discipleship program? Years. Yeah, and there's kind of a crash course there at the end. Yeah, very good. Yeah, the process. Gita.
So as you were going through the word study, I just saw a connection, because this morning another thought that came to mind as I was thinking about the wilderness was, that phrase, the voice crying in the wilderness. And I thought about that, and it was significant to me that the voice that's crying is in the wilderness. You're not crying to people who are in the wilderness. You are in the wilderness.
Calling from.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And just like Yahweh, he came down, he wanted to dwell among them. He just didn't want to say, okay, pray to me, I'm up here. He wanted to be right there in their midst. And that's kind of like us being in the world, but not of the world. And then doing the assignment that you talked about. Our assignment is to be that voice crying in the wilderness for Yah.
Good. Did I see another hand? Larry. Good morning.
Good morning. I think everyone knows about prison ministry in this group today. We had a lot of different groups come into the prisons. Some had really good programs. Some had some of very little value. And a very sad time for me was we had a group from a local church here in Salem who I won't name, had their group come in and talk to the inmates and tell them, you are new creations. You are free. You don't have to obey these rules. And obviously, the result was the inmates in those groups were getting into a lot of trouble. And it was a very sad day that we had to bar that group from ever coming into our prisons again. And when I think of that on 3 or 4 different levels, it just increases the sadness. But it goes back to Martin Luther in a way. If you remember, Martin Luther kind of had the same things. By grace are you saved through faith, not of works, lest anyone would boast, etc., etc. And it was interpreted by the peasants as freedom from serfdom. And there was the peasants' revolt. I forget however many peasants were killed in that. We have to get it right, or at least closer.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion in the epistles about that. You know, when you accept Messiah, but you're economically a slave, what do? Don't revolt. They're very clear about that. Yeah, we've talked before about the Bible's a really big book, and there's a lot in there. And most of us have a key verse mentality, which means we hold on to one verse really, really tight. And our brains are so small, my brain is so small, that I tend to let go of or ignore or even cross out the verses that don't agree with my little pet verse. And yeah, this question here, some verses say that we don't know when he is returning, and some say that we should know. If you read through this Matthew 24, if you read through it, it says, it emphasizes, you won't know, and then it emphasizes, you should know, so which is it? I showed this picture a couple of weeks ago. We have wee little brains. There are many things that make sense to God, and they're written in Scripture, and in our time and space humanity, it seems like a paradox. It seems like two things that are contradictory, and I have the word seemingly, because from where you're standing, they seem contradictory. We've all seen or heard the example of the blind men describing the elephant, and one's on this side and feels something and describes what he feels, and someone else is on this side, describes something else. Often things are different from our different perspectives. So on the left here would be, you should know when he's coming back. The verses that talk about that, talk about times and seasons and the parable of the fig tree. You should know. And then on the other side, there's verses that say you can't know. So which is it? If you should know, the conclusion is, watch. If you don't know, the conclusion is, watch. And we argue about whether you can or can't know, as opposed to encouraging people to watch. Been watching the news recently? Be ready. Don't fall asleep, figuratively or literally. God is doing something in the world. Don't fall asleep. That's on this side. Theologians in their fishbowl saying, we can't know. Stop doing that prophecy thing. Well, it's fine to have that perspective as long as you're doing this. Watch. Don't fall asleep. Don't get caught up in the culture. So yeah. There are times, depending on how old those of us who have multiple children, we have told different children the opposite rule at different times in their development. Like for one child, it's okay for you. Yeah, stay out as late as you want because this child always wants to go to bed at 9. And the other child, we're like, no, you have to fight that thing into you. You have to come home because this child wants to stay up until 2. Our theology has to be individualized towards success and development and maturity. And there are times when we should say, yep, Look out your window, we should know. And there's other times it's perfectly fine to say, go to sleep. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the day or the hour, things like that. Excellent. We're out of time. Let's close this in prayer. Father, I thank you that we are surprised, we are in the dark, we don't know what's coming next, but you do. And all that you have asked of us is to fight our flesh and try to stay awake with you. Stay awake with you for 1 hour. I thank you for the opportunity that each of us are going to have in this following week, simply to stay awake, to stay focused, and connect with you, connect with your Son. We ask this in the victorious name of your risen Son, Yeshua Messiah. Amen. We'll see you back here in about 15 minutes.